Hello everyone, thank you for joining us in this edition of The Inside. I am Bable Jonathan. Access to essential medicines is facing challenges, several challenges on the African continent, impacting public health and the well-being of millions of people. Factors contributing to this include high cost, limited availability of medicines, especially for endemic diseases, and poor infrastructure, weak regulatory systems, and inadequate insurance coverage. Over-dependence on imported medicine is also exacerbating the problem, and the problem is even more critical in sub-Saharan Africa, where poverty and diseases are widespread. And the newly created Africa Medicine Agency is now expected to address these issues. We are looking at all of these in this edition of The Inside. Meet our guest in some few seconds. Our guest today is Dr. Henry Fomundam. He is a public health and pharmaceutical care expert with several years of international experience. He is currently the regional director for Howard University Global Initiative with headquarters in South Africa. He has over a 30-year career working in the areas of medicine regulation, pharmaceutical care, research, global health management, and academia. He is an associate professor at Howard University Global Health and on faculty at the College of Pharmacy. He was an associate professor at the Stellenbosch University, Africa Center for HIV/AIDS for over 18 years, and also on faculty at Medecine and Monash University Public Health Programs for several years. He was the lead consultant for the African Union Development Agency in developing the framework and the alignment for the newly created African Medicine Agency, AMA. He was also the consultant for the UN Economic Commission for Africa to determine health products regulatory requirements and support for local manufacturing and pooled procurement of medicines in 10 selected African countries in order to apply the African Continental Free Trade Area principles. Professor Fomundam collaborated with the Nigerian National Agency for Food and Drugs Administration and Control, NAFDAC, to produce a clinical handbook on the prevention and management of most common adverse drug reactions in the HIV/AIDS program. He also worked as a SAT public health resource person, identifying training and research needs in all 15 member states in order to facilitate the selection of centers of excellence and specialization in the areas of medicine regulation, manufacturing, procurement, and rational medication use. Professor, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babila, for inviting me to your studio.
Let's begin by looking at the situation of access to essential medicine in Africa, which is still limping, so to speak.
Well, that's a very critical thing, but let me just give you a background. That medication use is one of the critical aspects in healthcare. You can directly relate it to the quality of health and life expectancy. And so life expectancy in Africa is the lowest that you can find globally. And so medications have been tied to that in the sense that we have less access to medicines, to quality medications. The continent has the highest counterfeit that you can find in the world. In fact, 42% of all counterfeit in the world is in Africa. And so this is affecting the quality of life and the life expectancy in Africa. Africa life expectancy is about 60 years averagely. It used to be about 40 years at the peak of HIV/AIDS. It's gone up to 50. Now we see it about 60. Japan has about 87 years old, and that's what you want to emulate in terms of healthcare delivery.
Now let's look at some of the factors, some of the enabling factors creating this unfavorable climate as far as access to medication is concerned in Africa.
Well, the very first one is that 97%, of some people put it at 90%, depending on the study that you look at, of the medications that we have are all imported medications. And we understand that everything that is imported is usually more expensive. It's not affordable for a population like what we have in Africa. And it's also the risk of you having the substandard and falsified medicines, which we call counterfeit medicines, because you import them, you don't make them. So the first thing is to encourage and be able to find out how is Africa going to be able to manufacture these medications so you can reduce the cost. And it's a tall order, but one that must be done. And so the question should be, when and how are we going to be able to do this?
What about the issue of high cost, limited availability of essential medicine, especially for endemic diseases?
Well, again, that goes to the fact that most of the endemic diseases, we don't manufacture the products. We have to import the products either from India, from USA, from Europe. And whenever you import it, you're paying about 3, 4, 5 times the prices. And in a lot of African countries, there's no price control. And so you could see from the time that the product leaves the manufacturer to when it actually gets to the patient, it could be about 5 times the price. That's not affordable. And so that makes it very challenging. And out-of-pocket payment in Africa is a major stumbling block, where in some cases you could see people paying 75% of their income on just buying medications for diabetes, for cancer, which again makes it very challenging.
We also have the problem of poor infrastructure and weak regulatory systems.
So the issue of poor infrastructure, we all know that in terms of when you order medications, most of them are ordered through the capital cities of each of the African countries. So where do they store these medications? Some of them storage is very poor. You have to store most medications at room temperature. Some of them don't have electricity, and so the room temperature, which is expected to be 25 degrees centigrade, and you get into a warehouse, is about 40 degrees centigrade. So the drugs, some of them are going to be denatured, some of them will be spoiled. And so the infrastructure for collecting data and reporting back on how these medicines are used on the adverse drug reactions is not there. Now let's talk about medicine regulation, which is the most critical part. Now, each country in Africa now has a medicine regulatory authority. They are supposed to make sure that all the drugs that are in the country are of good quality, efficacious, and they're safe. But because they don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the financing, the funding, they don't have the personnel, so this continent becomes the gateway for all unscrupulous manufacturers who want to manufacture counterfeit medicines. So that's the challenge that we have. So the regulation is weak, the borders are porous, people can move drugs across the border anytime that they want, and so that's what is happening on the continent.
What do you think about the problem of policy? There seems to be a real problem at that level, because we can see that not much is invested in public health as it ought to be.
Well, the problem is not a shortage of policy on the continent. They have beautiful policies. The problem is implementation. And some of the policies are hampered by the fact that this is colonial days, where each and every country, we now have 55 countries on the continent. And when everybody was coming out of decolonization, they wanted to become independent country, they made laws and regulations that were very protective. And now we need to treat the continent as one continent, sub-Saharan Africa. We need to make sure that we break those boundaries and be able to share information, share technology. But it's proving to be challenging. In healthcare and in public health and medication use, we call it harmonization. How do you harmonize the laws so that we can benefit from the same policies that are existing? And if we want to make sure that it's one Africa, that's what we need to do.
From your perspective, do you think that there is an issue of misplaced priority? There is an issue of mismanagement. There is an issue of corruption. We had the COVID-19, for example, is just the latest example in this side of the coin. The scandal is still there, and some government officials are said to have embezzled billions of francs CFA, of money that was meant to push back COVID-19.
Right.
And this is what is happening in other health sectors.
Yeah. So mismanagement and corruption is a problem, a very chronic problem in Africa, that it's criminal, and it affects a lot of the patients. So the COVID issue did not only happen, it happened in many African countries. South Africa, Malawi, Cameroon, and many other African countries, because suddenly there was a lot of money that was available. The accountability systems were not in place, and so the pilferage was extremely high. And the management, some of the COVID vaccines, which were very scarce, actually expired on the shelves of some of these countries. And so it is a problem that needs to be addressed immediately. The corruption is actually affecting, so corruption has a direct linkage to mortality. The amount of money that people siphon affects and increases the mortality that we face on this continent. That contributes significantly to the number of people that are dying.
Right, I'm going to ask you now about the consequences of this, because the situation is impacting healthcare and putting at stake the well-being of millions of people across the continent. From your broad experience working in different African nations on different health programs,
right.
What's your reading of this situation? How bad is it in terms of the consequence of the difficult access to essential medication on the health, on the death toll, or better still, the mortality rate on the continent?
Yeah. So the consequence is very glaring and is understood. And you need to be able to visit some of the clinics and hospitals that I visit in Zambia, in Malawi, in Uganda. And you see a lot of the hospitals, particularly clinics that were built in the 60s and the 70s, they were meant for a smaller catchment. And you go there and you see 10 times the number of people that are using it. And the hospitals are poorly developed. People wait on long lines. The infrastructure is poor. And part of this is because of the funding that is not being directed properly into healthcare. Now, in 2001, all the ministers of all the African countries met in Nigeria, what they call the Abuja Declaration. All of them agreed that 15% of the national budget will be put towards health, because it is disgraceful that you call yourself a sovereign nation, an independent country, yet you cannot take care of the basic, which is essential health, which is a human rights issue in your country. And so they had agreed in 2001 that 15% of each national budget will go towards health. Most of them are even not able to make up to 5%. This is 2001, 24 years ago. And so this is something that needs to be brought back to the table when we talk about medications and local manufacturing.
Right. We'll go into the details of medicine regulation, what should be done, what is necessary to put things right. And of course, we're looking at what the African Medicine Regulatory or the African Medicine Agency is expected to bring to the table to solve some of these issues. Professor, I want us to go back to square one, so to speak, to really look at what medicine regulation is all about.
Right. So medicine regulation is the fact that it came about, and we could see it, the history in the US, the FDA, back in the early 1900s, where people were dying because of concoctions that people made. And so there was a necessity to make sure that you had an agency in country that was supposed to safeguard the chemicals that are being used, make sure that they are safe, make sure that they are of good quality, and make sure that they do what they're supposed to do. And so in Africa, people move around and make claims on different medications. It's illegal, because if you don't have proof, you cannot make. We have a lot of complementary medicines in Europe, in the US. Complementary medicines means you help the body, you help the immune system, but you cannot make claims that you cure X, Y, Z when you have not tested it. And that's what I've been able to tell people in different lectures and different fora, that that's the issue that we have with traditional medicine, that we're not moving fast enough. So a regulatory authority is then supposed to make sure that if the drugs are being manufactured, the manufacturing plant has what you call good manufacturing practice. You can inspect it, make sure that everything is clean, is above board. But if you are importing it, they're also supposed to do the review and make sure that the drug meets all those three key things. It's efficacious, which means it can do what it's supposed to do, it's safe, and it's of good quality. So now, on the continent, every single country now has a national medicine regulatory authority. Now, whether it does the work properly, it's another question, because you need the expertise to be able to do that. And most of the national regulatory authorities do not have the expertise, do not have the funding.
Right. You started answering my next question already, because we know that the medicine regulatory systems in Africa are weak. So, what makes them weak?
What makes them weak is a number of factors. We start from the fact that a lot of them are not independent, like you find in Europe and in the US. Independent means they would make decisions out of the government influence. The decisions will be barely based on merit. So most of them are government controlled because their funding comes from the government, probably approved by various parliaments. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that they are totally underfunded. Most of them are probably receiving 10 to 20% of what a proper functioning regulatory authority should do. And so what the WHO has done is classified regulatory authorities by maturity level. Maturity level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Most African countries are at the rudimentary level, level 1. Countries like Ghana, Tanzania at level 3, Nigeria level 3. And so that's good. So we're beginning to see some countries improve. And we need to see those countries get to level 4. Singapore is a country that is at level 4, which means they're very robust. They're actually almost comparable to what you find with the FDA, which is the premier regulatory authority in the world. And so these are underfunded. Then personnel. A lot of them don't have the requisite personnel that you need to run a proper regulatory authority. And then some of them, with the training that they have, some personnel are trained in Cuba, some trained in Russia, some trained everywhere. So we need to start coming up with a regulatory science curriculum on this continent that will be very helpful and customized to our issues.
Now, we're going to talk about how to get to that shortly. But when we look at the fact that the medicine regulatory systems are weak, the immediate fallout of that is that we have poor medication that comes into through the porous borders, and it goes directly to affect the health of the consumers. And we have this very chronic problem, so to speak, because it's call it chronic because it's been there as long as we can imagine. Street medicines, street vendors,
yes.
People selling medication on the street and everywhere,
yes.
In the quarters, and people are often rushing to those areas, to those people, because of the cost.
Yes, and that's what each and every government should take note of it. I work in all over the place. You have what they call drug shops in East Africa. They try to differentiate that between drug shops and pharmacies. But drug shops are very, very popular because they're in the neighborhoods. And like you've said, people like to buy from street vendors because it's affordable. But the quality of it is suspect. And this is where the counterfeit manufacturers, be it in Pakistan, in Iran, in India, they sell through the street vendors because they would label it the same brand name and then sell it at 1/20th, 1/30th the price. And so the people buy it. And usually it's inadequate active ingredient, which means you buy paracetamol or you buy penicillin and it says 300, 500 milligrams, and it actually has maybe 50 milligrams, just to give you the flavor when you're drinking a penicillin. And so that would never take care of most of the infections that you have. So let me also make sure we bring that home. 500,000 people die on this continent a year, and that's a way underestimate. I think it's double that number from counterfeit medicines. And so 42%, like I said, of all counterfeit in the world is meant and destined for Africa because of the corruption, the porous borders, and the fact that our regulatory authority is weak and they don't have the personnel. Each and every regulatory authority should have an inspectorate which works with the national security, with the national police, to make sure that they can inspect, they can burn. But if you keep doing that and you don't lower the prices, people are very resilient. They will keep looking for these people who are street vendors or selling somewhere in the basement somewhere, and they will buy it. So the government has a role to play, is to make sure that what the continent is now thinking about is local manufacturing. These drugs have to be manufactured. There's no reason why up till now we still have people importing penicillin, importing paracetamol, importing basic generic drugs that We should be making them on this continent.
And low productivity, low production of medicine on the African continent is creating the enabling environment for those illegal business activities around drugs.
Right.
So the problem is, or the question now is, why is Africa still unable to move its medicine production to an acceptable level? Is it a problem of expertise? Is it a problem of infrastructure? Is it a problem of financial resources for the production of medicine on the African continent? Because people continue importing basic medication like what you just mentioned now.
Yes. It's multifactorial in the sense that, number one, we have fractionated 55 African countries. So if you manufacture the medicines in Nigeria, how are you going to be able to sell? Because Nigeria is not going to consume all, even though it's a big economy. Or if you manufacture the medicines in Cameroon or in Lesotho. And so that's why they came up with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It was meant, and they wanted to start with pharmaceuticals, that if Botswana is able, which Botswana is now wanting to manufacture vaccines, the population of Botswana is less than 2 million. So definitely, if they're producing vaccines in Botswana, the market is going to be the rest of the African countries. What are the issues on tariffs? The tariffs on medications are very high, even though the African countries don't manufacture these medicines. So that's one of the factors. Number two is the funding. Where do you get the funding from? And I think we should be pushing all the governments to be able to be partners in any venture that would make sure that drugs are being manufactured on the continent. So the funding is not there. And yes, you're correct, the expertise. It's been said by so many people that 60% of the African intelligentsia is probably out of the continent. We need to start looking for ways to bring them back to the continent. They can work virtually now that most people are working virtually, but we need to engage all of that. So it's very multifactorial.
Now, when we look at issues concerning regulation, it looks like not much is done in that domain.
A lot is being done, but nearly not adequate. It's way suboptimal. So a lot of steps have been taken. Now you get the African medicine playing field is divided into three. It's very unique. You don't find that in any other country. There's the AMA that has been created. There's the regional economic blocks, so CEMAC, SADC, and then there's the National Regulatory Authority. Now, that's a good start, but we have to align it. We have to make sure that the three are talking to each other. We have to make sure that the funding is available, the communication is available, the expertise is available. So all of this, there's some progress that is being made on that front. And you could see in Nigeria, for example, they're burning up counterfeit medications. They're burning up counterfeit medications, and in many African countries.
Let's talk about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Anchored Pharma Initiative, harmonized regulatory and quality standards framework. Is this helping in that perspective?
It is supposed to help, and it would eventually help. Right at this moment, it's a good idea that we're looking forward to making sure that we can address it. Now, what African Continental Free Trade Area is meant to do is that if you manufacture your products in Africa, meaning about 60% of the materials come from the African continent, then you qualify for the African Continental Free Trade Area. And when that happens, then you can take advantage to be able to export with no tariffs to the other countries. But here are the problems that you have. The Director General of the African Continental Free Trade Area talks about the fact that this continent has about maybe more than 30 currencies, so that makes it very difficult already. The second thing is, if this is accepted and put into place, the products can move, but a lot of the African countries are still going to need a visa. And I heard Dangote of Nigeria said it was difficult for him to travel around Africa compared to somebody who comes from Europe or somebody comes from the US. So now, if you make it free for the products to move and the people cannot move, you've not addressed the issue. And so that's what the African Continental Free Trade Area was meant to be. Facilitate trade within the African countries, make sure that the tariffs are taken out. And a lot of African countries have signed up to it. The issue in Africa that we always say is implementation, especially if there's no repercussions if you don't do it properly.
Now, about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Anchored Farmer Initiative, I listened to you earlier. You were talking about looking at what others are doing elsewhere and trying to pick out some of the things that can fit into the African continent in order to improve.
Right.
Tell us more about that.
A lot of people, particularly politicians all over the world, they think you can take something that is working in Europe or in the US and be able to customize it to work. So, number one, I said African medicine regulation on this continent is going to be 3 levels. That's brand new. We need to figure out how that's going to work for us. And the reason why it's in 3 levels is because you have 55 countries to deal with. So you can't have an AMA office, for example, dealing with 55 countries. So they now have to work through the regional economic blocks before you get to the country. So the African Continental Free Trade Area, it's a very laudable, very much appreciated initiative. But how are we going to make it work? Which means, are these countries going to be able to deal with the fact that they're not supposed to charge tariff on medications? Some of them sign up to it, but they're unable to do it. And so those are the challenges that we face. The will must be there, and for the African countries to implement such a lofty idea.
The will must be followed by concrete action that should give the expected results.
Exactly.
Now we are looking into the newly created African Medicine Agency. Professor, what's this institution all about?
So the African Medicine Agency, it's a specialized agency of the African Union. And I want to say that is a dream deferred. We should have had this since 1978. In 1978, there was the Alma Ata Declaration, which was organized by WHO. And Alma Ata was in the former USSR, so it's 1978. And the pledge that primary health care was going to be the backbone of Africa healthcare delivery. And to that effect, they promised that by the year 2000, which was the slogan, would be health for all. And so we are far off from it. 25 years after that, we don't have health for all. And so it was a dream deferred to say, how do we get Africa as one block, talking one language in regulating medicines, in preventing the issue of counterfeit medicines that we're talking about, in working together with the clinical trials. We have something which is so terrible, it's been aching to me, which is called the neglected tropical diseases. There are a couple of diseases in Africa and developing countries that we call them neglected. And the reason why we call them neglected is because they're being neglected by the big pharmaceutical companies. And I think that's a terrible indictment to the African intelligentsia and scientists, that you have a group of diseases in Africa that we call them neglected by somebody else. We should be, as the African scientists and academia, carrying on research on diseases. So these are usually diseases that have smaller numbers. They're based in Africa. The drug companies don't want to put in a lot of money and develop medications for a disease that they will not be able to generate profit, which is true, because the pharmaceutical companies are there to also make profit. But if they cannot do it, the African governments should be able to work with their partners and work with each other to develop medicines for these diseases, like sleeping sickness. We don't have a brand new medication. We don't have a good medication for sleeping sickness because it's a neglected disease.
And the tsetse flies just everywhere.
Exactly.
Causing the problem.
Yeah.
And then, so you were the lead consultant for the African Union Development Agency in developing the framework of the alignment of the newly created African Medicine Agency. Tell us about the framework and the alignment.
So this is the problem that you have, because it was a dream deferred. There was a gap in medicines on the continent, harmonizing it. So a number of key players then came in to do different things, which brought about some progress, but now it's going to be challenging for the outfit called AMA. So we have WHO that has done tremendous work on the continent. We have NEPAD that was doing harmonization. We have MSH, we have JSI. There are many people, many organizations that came. You saw them during COVID. People were procuring, different organizations were procuring medications. And then you have the Africa CDC, which is also a specialized agency of the African Union. Now, because there was a void, all of these partners came in to address issues on the quality of medicines, the efficacy of medicine, pool procurement. They talk about local manufacturing, but there are too many players in that field. And so one of the issues that we're trying to develop a framework and alignment is to say, we need to align. We need to have a framework where it's managed by one African medicine agency. And that's a tall order, because how do you dislodge these players who are already existing because there was a void? Yet you need them, you need to collaborate with them. So that's the challenge that we have. We wanted to, the African Medicine Agency is based on the fact that all 55 countries will be able to ratify. They will talk to each other. We can reduce some of the cost of getting expertise for each country, and you work as one block. So how do you regulate the medicines? And so the first assignment of the African Medicine Agency, the main objective is to say they should assist the regional blocks and assist national regulatory authority to ensure that they are improving access to medicines, making sure that the quality of medicines, the efficacy, and the safety is guaranteed. That's the job of the African Medicine Agency. It does have a lot of challenges. It's easier said right now because it's a new outfit. The treaty that brought it into action has quite some issues in terms of, it wasn't clear that is the African Medicine Agency going to be a regulatory authority? It's not been spelled out, because it says its main objective is to assist existing structures that we have that are regulating medicines. They are also going to now regulate complex molecules, which we think is more difficult to be regulated by the regional economic blocks and the national regulatory authorities. But are you giving them the authority as a national regulatory authority? So in that vein, I think the treaty will need to be amended.
How much should we expect from AMA in terms of upgrading the standard of medicine regulation in Africa?
Well, in terms of expectation, that's another thing that we have to do, manage the expectation. Everybody now thinks that AMA is going to come and it's going to be the magic one to be able to do that. It's going to take some time for AMA to do that, which means you would work with the national regulatory authority in Cameroon, in Gabon, to make sure that we are on the same page. We make sure the issues on policy, make sure that we decide on which of the medications, if AMA reviews a complex molecule, then Gabon should be able to accept it, Cameroon should be able to accept it, every country should be able to accept it. And that's part of the problem with the treaty. Cameroon, Gabon, Nigeria has a right to say, no, I don't want it. Now, and they're signatories to it. That makes it very weak. And so that's a problem that I've spoken about in terms of the framework, in terms of the alignment, that we need to be able to correct that. And I've also spoken about the fact that we need to define what each level does. Now we have 3 levels: the AMA, the regulatory, the regional blocks, and the national regulatory authority. We need to be able to come in there and define it properly so that we're being cost effective in doing that. And we need to have some sort of enforcement that AMA should be able to do.
So, looking at all these challenges, if you were to advise on some kind of restructuring of AMA,
right,
what should be changed where?
Well, I have advised already, because I wrote the report on the framework and on the alignment. And in the report, I have several recommendations, which I can point out a number of them to you, which is what your question is actually pertaining to. So the first thing is that we need to make sure that the players who came to fill the void, we realign them and still work with them. WHO, NEPAD, Africa CDC. Now, they need to now know that there's an AMA in town, which is meant to coordinate everything regulation, clinical trials, they have to do quality of the medicines, they have to coordinate that. So that's the first thing that we need to make sure that it's aligning properly. Now, the expertise, and I have also written that in the report, we're going to have to rely and use expertise that is in the diaspora. We have a lot of Africans in the diaspora who want to give back to this continent, and a lot of them are in the area of medicine regulation or expertise to that effect, or medicine manufacturing. So we need to make sure that we tap into that process. And then you could see the different blocks. The Francophone countries are actually lagging behind when it comes to medicine regulation. How do we make sure that we bring them up to par? And then the local manufacturing that we're talking about, the regulatory authority needs to facilitate that. Now, what are the stumbling blocks of local manufacturing? Is the infrastructure, is the funding, again, is the expertise that we're talking about. And the governments of Africa need to be understand this. Like I said, in 2001, they signed for the Abuja Declaration, and none of them complied with it. I think it's only 1 or 2 countries of the 55 that complied with it. So we need to make sure that the governments not only have a will to do something, but prioritize it.
Right. So the Chief Executive Officer of Ghana's Food and Drugs Authority, Dr. Delise Mimi Dako, has been appointed to head the agency.
Sure.
What do you think about her leadership?
I think Dr. Dako, that I know, we've met a couple of times before. I met her in some of these AMA meetings where I was presenting. She brings quite some experience in national regulation. But national regulation is going to be very different from what AMA is expected to do. However, she's going to bring that expertise to bear and bring it to AMA, and we're expecting her to do well. There are a number of things that have been cited that AMA needs to be able to engage with. It has a lot of challenges. Not all the African countries have adopted AMA. Big countries in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, have not adopted AMA yet. And so that's a problem. So out of the 55 countries, I think it's about 30 of them, 28 to 30 of them that have adopted AMA, which means they're going to be working directly with AMA. So that's a problem, which needs to be resolved as soon as possible. And the players that were in that space before AMA came to being, you need to figure out how to manage them. And then where is AMA going to be getting the funding from? We've just seen what the new administration in the US done. Over-dependency on donors, it's horrible for this continent. Since the new US administration held back funding to this continent, we're talking about over 200,000 people that have died. And whose fault is it? We cannot say the US government at that point created an expectation, but you cannot put all the blames on them. African countries ought to be providing basic funds, especially for things like HIV, AIDS, and TB. They need to be providing funds and taking care of your citizens. And so the AMA leadership will have to figure out new ways of looking for funding that will be able to support AMA. And I would push that most of that of the funding should come from the African countries.
Now let's wrap up by addressing directly the concerns of the ordinary sub-Saharan Africa, because I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa because that's where poverty is rife and diseases spreading everywhere. Yeah. The ordinary African, the sub-Saharan Africa listening to you now, yeah, will want to know how AMA and all of what we are talking about now, if done, executed properly on the ground, yeah, will change his situation in terms of being able to have paracetamol, yeah, being able to have good paracetamol and not some thing that has been concocted somewhere which is not actually good for his health, yeah, being able to have some of these basic medicines, yeah, when he is sick, when, yeah, he needs them.
That's a very good question, and it's a question that when I present to the medicine regulators, I always say, you have to regulate medicines and keep the patient in mind, which is the average person that you're talking about. The medicines that you regulate, are they actually benefiting the patient? Are you improving their quality of life? Is life expectancy improving? So we also have to manage expectation that because AMA is a new outfit, we shouldn't expect major results to be coming out in the next 2 years, 3 years. It's going to take a little bit of time to build it up to that process. And yes, AMA is meant to do exactly that. AMA is meant to work with the national regulatory authorities and make them more efficient. We've just said the reason why you have a lot of counterfeit, a lot of expensive medications, part of it is because the regulatory authorities are not up to par. They don't have the expertise, the infrastructure, the funding, and so that's AMA is supposed to come and be able to assist them, especially with technology, especially with perhaps even raising funds that would benefit some of the countries or push for the fact that these countries should meet the Abuja Declaration and 15% of the national budget should actually go to health, which I would probably say a fraction of that should go to the pharmaceutical. If we know what we know now, that people are living longer in other parts of the world, better quality of life, and it's directly related to the medications that we have. But we're here with poor medications on the street side, which is what you're asking for. If AMA does what they're supposed to do properly, eventually it should be able to help each national regulatory authority and the regional blocks, which are supposed to be the conduit from AMA to the regional block and to the national regulatory authority. So we need to streamline all of that. There's still a lot of work that has to be done, and I'm hoping that Dr. Dako would be able to use some of the expertise in Ghana that she's had at the national level to bring to bear. But it's going to be a good work to do and challenging.
No, there are many Africans who depend on traditional medicine. You mentioned that earlier. What can be done to improve that area of medicine production? Because there is a problem of quality control, there is a problem of the dosage, there's a problem of a lot of things that have been, even though some of the traditional practitioners now are using medical reports from hospitals to be able to administer their medication and using some other modern techniques. Yeah. What can be done to upgrade that, to put it at a level where there will be a little more assurance in terms of the impact that it brings to the health of the consumers?
Yeah, very good question, and one that people in Africa are very concerned. Traditional medicine has a role, but we cannot apply it the way it is now, because a lot of traditional medicines, we don't even know what is in the active ingredient. We don't even know the composition of it. And so if you don't know the composition of it, then you're treating somebody in the blind. And somebody's going to make a statement that, how did people survive 200 years ago? Yes, that's why the quality of life and the life expectancy 200 years ago is not as high as we have it now. This is modern times, and so we need to evolve. Just like communication back in the days was not using cell phone, but even the traditional healers and everybody now is using cell phone to improve communication. But the problem, it's not only on the traditional healers, it's on the government, because a lot of traditional healers are worried about intellectual property because people have been able to take their formulations and active ingredients. So your government has to protect you. They have to do a call-up. In a lot of the ministries of health around Africa, they're beginning to create a department of traditional medicine because you want them to come register their product so you can partner with other developing countries and developed countries to see, can we analyze if this person is making claims that I can treat HIV or I can treat pain, let's see the active ingredient. But you need to make sure that it's intellectual property. You protect the person's chemical or product or formulation that they've come up with. So those are the issues. Otherwise, traditional medicines have a role to play because we have more traditional doctors than you have most of the orthodox or regular medical doctors who are leaving the continent in droves. I mean, most of these are the brain drain, which we have not spoken about. It's a major challenge, but our traditional doctors are going to be there, and if we can integrate them, that will be good. But to integrate them, they must be able to open the space and make sure that we know what it's the active ingredient or the composition of each of their traditional medicine.
All right, maybe before we go, a word on how governments of African nations can solve this problem of the medical personnel moving out of the continent. What can be done to keep them back home?
Yeah, so it's a human rights issue which you cannot hold them. What people have devised a lot of means is that if you give scholarship, which Cameroon, for example, CUES, which is the medical institution here, it's a government institution. They need to be able to sign an agreement that after they're sponsored by the government, they will be able to work for 10 years, 15 years. And they need to be able to do that. That's number one. Number two, there's another easier way of doing it, is that most of the people that are being poached are your medical doctors, your nurses, and your pharmacists. Now, we have something which we did in the HIV AIDS management, which we call task shifting. We shifted the tasks that doctors were doing to some nurses. We shifted some of the nursing tasks to nursing assistant. We shifted some of the tasks from pharmacists to pharmacy assistants. Now, nursing assistants, pharmacy assistants are not being poached. So we have to design the app. This is my own innovation. We have to design African healthcare delivery around this level, this cadre, because some of them are well trained. I mean, these are some have 4-year programs, 5-year programs that should be able to support our healthcare system, and we know that they're not going to be poached. That's one. And then finally, what people want to hear is that if you improve their standards of living, if that's possible, pay them higher, and they should be able to stay. So we're looking for ways that we can retain them.
Thank you so much for your time and the insights you've shared with us in this edition of the program.
Thank you very much for inviting.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook and YouTube. You can also follow the rebroadcast of the program on Friday at 5 p.m. Thank you so much for your kind attention.